Eases mandatory minimum sentences, increases good time credits that can allow for early release, and encourages participation in rehabilitative rather, among other things. It still has to go back to the House and be signed by the president before it becomes law. But was this a good first start or step? Let me ask tonight's panel. From townhall.com, where he serves as political editor, it's Fox News contributor and Benson and Harf co-host. Guy Benson is here, and she is the Independent Women's Forum board member and former New York Congresswoman Nan Hayworth. And we've got Washington Examiner commentary editor. It is Tim Kearney, and he's in New York City. Get a rope. Hi. Nice
Love
to see you.
being here. Thank you.
Isn't it great this time of year?
Christmas in New York. It
is so much fun. And there are people, hi people, surrounding the studio, which is terrifying and exhilarating all at the same time. So let's talk about this, because it certainly didn't seem like this was the direction that this administration was going in when the president took the oath of office in January 2017, with Jeff Sessions being very heavy-handed when it comes to criminal justice, and his son-in-law seeming to hold the minority opinion. How did things shift?
And his daughter. So I think Jared and Ivanka were both very important on this issue. And I think the president, over the course of the last year, has met with a number of people who made very personal appeals on this front on behalf of their relatives. I believe Kanye West and his wife, Kim Kardashian, they brought a few of these to his attention. And I think sometimes with those personal stories, the president can be moved. This was a good piece of legislation. I think you could argue that maybe some of the amendments that were defeated tonight should have passed. But as a whole, I think this is a really good victory. 87-12. I had Steve Scalise on the radio show earlier today, and I asked him, if this passes as expected today or tomorrow, do you anticipate easy passage if it pings back to the House? And he said basically, yeah, because it passed with more than 350 votes last time, and I think a lot of conservatives think it was strengthened in the U.S. Senate. So this thing's going to end up on the president's desk. A very major victory, a bipartisan victory for him. Yeah. If the president wants to make a case to moderate independent voters over the next 2 years that he can be a president that governs on behalf of all Americans, this is a concrete victory that he can point to.
And it's also a template for immigration, and that human beings can evolve, and you can appeal to the better side of human nature, because there are those of us civil libertarians who've been looking at this issue for quite some time going, what the hell are we doing here? We're not necessarily making society better. Of course we want to punish bad people who hurt others and assault women and children have no place in a functioning society. But
and
taking
this law
people,
does not coddle them.
Yes, and taking people who are low-level offenders or who are guilty of consensual crimes and locking them in cages, there is something very wrong about that.
Absolutely. And the support for this bill was broad. It was eloquent. Martin Luther King's daughter, Dr. Bernice King, wrote a moving support for this bill that I anticipate will become law. It's just a fact that communities of color and communities that have been economically disadvantaged in general have been also at a disadvantage in the criminal justice system. So this bill helps to provide them.
Yeah, and that's not just emotionalism and hyperbole
that they deserve.
You can look at data and
exactly.
What does this say to you, and what do you like about it?
Well, it's called the First Step Act, and it's actually a bill name that is apt, because right now our federal criminal justice system, particular prison system, is broken. People go into prison, and it is not a correctional institution. They come out often worse. The prison breeds sort of antisocial behavior and rewards it, and it doesn't help people. So when they come out, our government has then made them less able to function in society. This will do small steps to undo some of that and to minimize the harm that's done. But it's going to take something a lot bigger than this to fix our criminal justice system, so that it's not just taking bad guys off the street, which is crucial, but that it's also no longer making it worse.
It also, I think it's good to have a conversation about what do we mean when we say bad guys? Because the definition has actually changed over time, and you realize there are some people who are locked up who want to be good. They want to learn. They want to get college degrees.
This incentivizes that.
Yes.
This bill incentivizes that. And it also, a lot of people who oppose this bill have said, well, you have certain criminals who committed some serious crimes that are now eligible to get these shortened sentences, but they have to be deemed low or minimal risk to even have a sniff at being considered for a shortened sentence.
And it's always discretionary.
Well, let's
correct. And I
It's
just want to say
always
very
discretionary
briefly,
for the Bureau of Prisons.
12 votes no. They were all Republicans. I really like some of those guys, Ben Sass, Marco Rubio, but I want to shout out Mike Lee, who was such a huge champion of this
Absolutely.
bill for years. It's a big, big night for him.
Former
He deserves
federal
it.
prosecutor.
Yeah,
right.
and
Good point.
he's
Yeah.
also
And an
on the
eloquent
Supreme
supporter
Court
of that
shortlist.
bill.
Speaking of the courts, a Texas judge struck down the Affordable Care Act on Friday, while many Republicans were quick to applaud the ruling. It could come back to haunt them, and here's why. The case is expected to make its way to the Supreme Court. They could issue a ruling in late 2019. That means it would likely become a 2020 presidential campaign issue. Democrats made healthcare a central part of their successful midterm messaging, and they were able to ride that to major gains in the House. So, can they use it to take back the White House as well? Nan?
Well, I was elected in 2010 as part of the big Republican wave, the first female physician elected to a full term in the Congress.
And part of that was because of...
Exactly, because of that.
Your eloquent
law
defense of freedom in the face of Obamacare.
Right, and it's still, Obamacare makes just as little sense today as it did then. And of course, we had a Democratic Senate, President Obama, who prohibited our making major changes, obviously. The chance that we had was after the 2016 election. And because Republicans in the Senate would not relinquish the filibuster on passing legislation, Democrats had the upper hand because they would not provide the votes needed to get 60 votes to pass a bill that would repeal and replace. It's going to be awfully tough now. The Republicans better be ready.
A complicating factor is that this ruling, it's the jurisprudence there is a little dubious. I immediately got on email and phone calls with conservative lawyers who had previously sued to try to overturn Obamacare, and they said there's some sketchiness here. Most importantly, the ruling is that the individual mandate is unconstitutional. Then they take a step, the judge takes a step to say that means the whole law is unconstitutional because it rests on it. And if anything has been shown by the last couple of years, the Democrats were wrong when they said the individual mandate was the linchpin of all this. The individual mandate can be thrown out and good riddance. And
there
unfortunately,
are conservative legal scholars who say the same thing.
Yes.
So
Right.
it was a leap in logic.
It was.
For this judge, this federal judge, to say, okay, the individual mandate is now toothless. It went to zero. It is no
Yes.
longer a tax.
because of the Tax Cut and Jobs Act passed a
Yeah,
year ago.
right.
But it's like, it looks like judicial activism, but just sort of kind of on our side.
So
the
what does that
conservative
do ultimately for health insurance in this country now?
Well, I think Obamacare, it's still not working, right?
Yeah.
There have been some tweaks that have made it better. Ironically, the Republican undermining of it has actually helped the law in some ways.
But it's all administrative, like association health plans.
That's right, which actually can be helpful. I think there are pitfalls for Republicans here and some risks for them politically. But the Democrats right now are in sort of a safe spot, they think politically, where they can lash out at Republicans saying they're going to take away pre-existing conditions, protections, and all these things. But at some point, as the healthcare status quo policy-wise continues to deteriorate and costs keep going up under the so-called Affordable Care Act, there's going to be a big push from the left to go to full-blown government control. And that's when I think the Democrats lose their political high ground.
But the Republicans
They
have got
have
to
it
be
now. I
ready
mean,
to make
they have the
arguments.
numbers and they have the advantage because Republicans have not given an acceptable alternative.
They haven't
Last word,
made the
Dan.
arguments. The Republicans have got to make the arguments. Guy is right. Tim is right. You're right, Kennedy. We all know this is a terrible law, but Republicans